Good afternoon, colleagues. It's just about the time we designated to start officially. So we welcome you to this afternoon webinar on imagining and acting on the complex future now, where we are going to be introduced to Systems Informed Foresight by our colleague Arsene Ngombe, Chief Enabler at RIAHSAH Co, based in South Africa. This is the fourth in the Navigating Complexity webinar series that is convened by the Complexity Innovative Research and Evaluation Methodologies Hub, CIREM. So we are happy to have you join us. Our interest is in really driving this discussion around managing complexity, making sense of it, how systems thinking can be one of the ways that helps us to appreciate the interconnections and interdependencies within the challenges that we face, but then also how we navigate the political realities of our work. So it is a pleasure to have Arsene. Arsene, you are very much welcome. The Hub is happy to host you. And you can take the moment. I believe you may want to do some slight introduction as part of your presentation. Maybe it is part of what you have packaged for us. Yeah. But the team, the colleagues are eagerly waiting to hear from you. And colleagues, I invite you to note down the questions you may have or reflections and comments. We believe that these are spaces where many of us come with already good experience. So it's just one way of consolidating, but also sharing with others. So without taking more ado, I invite Arsene to take us through his presentation. I remain Aloysius Ssennyonjo, the team lead for the CIREM Hub. Thank you. Over to you, Arsene.
Thank you so much. I want to start by thanking the CIREM Hub and its team, particularly Dr. Aloysius, for inviting me. I'm truly honored to be part of this conversation. I also want to congratulate the team for the incredible work they are doing, bringing complexity and systems thinking into policy. I've been following some posts on LinkedIn and previous interaction with Dr. Aloysius. This is really something exciting. I have to say that what we are building here is both inspiring and essential in today's rapidly changing world. My name is Arsene. I'm the Chief Enabler at RIAHSAH, which is a network social enterprise working at the intersection of people, systems, and markets across East and Southern Africa. Our work is around supporting organizations navigating complex but also fast-changing environment through systems analysis, through strategy, facilitation, capacity building, and technical support when it comes to project design, delivery, and learning. Through the work that we've been doing in the sector, we've developed Systems Informed Foresight, which is a methodology that combines systems thinking and foresight to really help organizations understand complex systems today and design strategies that are adaptive for the future. This is what I'll be walking you through over the next 20 minutes or so. Before we dive in, let me quickly walk you through the agenda that I prepared today. So we'll start by looking at the challenges, why so many interventions in complex systems often fail when it comes to the implementation. Then I will clarify what we mean by a system and why systems thinking matters in understanding these dynamics. Next, I will share the experience that led us to develop Systems Informed Foresight and how we integrate systems thinking and foresight in practice. We will also explore the core idea behind SIF, which is the Systems Informed Foresight, and then go through the SIF process, which we call AAA, that stands for Awareness, Application, and Adaptation. And then I will also highlight where SIF can be applied in real-world context. Then finally, we will explore why this matters for research and practice collaboration, and then we wrap up with a discussion. That's, in a way, the path that will follow over the next minute. In many complex environments, we see well-designed programs or even reforms, investment, and strategies that still struggle to produce lasting results. This happens across social programs, public policy initiatives, health systems, climate interventions, even private sector strategies. The reason is not always that the ideas themselves are wrong. Very often the challenge is that interventions are designed at the level of symptoms, while the deeper architecture of the system remains unchanged. In complex systems, outcomes rarely follow a simple cause and effect logic. They emerge from interactions between many actors, institutions, incentives, and narratives operating across different levels. For example, in health systems, outcomes are not shaped only by hospitals or clinics, the way we think in most cases. They are influenced by policy environments, by funding structures, community behaviors in most cases, supply chains in some cases, but also data systems and governance arrangement. These different elements interact continuously. When those interactions reinforce one another, they stabilize certain patterns of behavior. Those patterns can persist even when actors recognize that change is necessary. And in our traditional way of planning, we often assume that if the right activities are implemented, then the desired outcomes will follow. But in complex systems, outcomes are shaped by relationships and interactions, not only by activities. Designing effective interventions requires more than technical solutions. It's, in a way, requires understanding of how systems operate, where influence actually exists, how different actors and forces shape the environment in which discussions or decisions unfold. This challenge is what led us at RIAHSAH to develop what we call Systems Informed Foresight. But before going further, it's useful to clarify what we mean by a system. A system, simply put, is an interconnected set of elements that interact to produce patterns of behavior over time. These elements can include actors such as organizations, institutions, or communities, as well as incentives, rules. It can also include narratives, flows of information and resources in some cases, and the relationship that connects them. What defines a system is not simply the presence of its elements, but the interactions between them. As these interactions repeat, they create patterns that gradually shape the system's behavior. For example, in a governance system, a repeated way of allocating resources or coordinating decisions or responding to pressures can become normalized over time. And over time, these patterns determine how that particular system operates. And that's when we speak about the behavior of the system. What this means is that outcomes rarely come from a single actor or an intervention alone. Instead, they emerge from the collective interactions across the system. And because these interactions reinforce one another, systems often develop a degree of stability. Certain behaviors or outcomes can persist even when the actors recognize the need for change. And this is why addressing complex challenges requires looking beyond individual organizations or activities to really understand the structures and dynamics of the wider system. Understanding these dynamics is the first step toward identifying where meaningful change is actually possible. And understanding this dynamic also not only show us where change might be possible, but it also explains why many interventions struggle. Outcomes are shaped by systems dynamic, not just activities we implement. So that's something that we always emphasize when we implement systems informed foresight. Now, once we begin to see problems as part of systems, an important question emerges. How do we understand how these systems behave so that interventions can actually influence change. And this is where systems thinking becomes essential. Systems thinking is an approach that helps us examine how different actors, incentives, and relationships and structures interact to produce outcomes we observe. So instead of focusing only on individual activities, what the approach does is it allows us to analyze the dynamics of the system itself, how decisions are connected, how behaviors reinforce one another, and where influence within the system may actually exist. And by mapping these relationships, systems thinking helps us identify leverage points, and these are places where interventions may be able to shift systems' behavior. For example, improving maternal health outcomes may require looking beyond infrastructure alone to really understand how supply chains, how healthcare worker incentives, and community beliefs interact within the system. In this way, systems thinking will help us then ensure that interventions are designed not only as technical solutions, but as responses that emerge with underlying dynamics of the system. Now, let me talk about the experience that led us to design SIF. When we founded RIAHSAH, much of our work was already grounded in systems thinking. We were supporting organizations in the social sector and in market systems to design strategies, programs, and intervention in complex environments. And I have to say that systems thinking proved extremely valuable. It helped us map actors, understand relationships, identify feedback loops, and recognize where influence and power sit within the system. However, as our work evolved, we began encountering a recurring limitation. Systems thinking helps us understand how systems function today. But many of the strategic questions organizations were asking us were really about the future. For example, how do we design strategies for systems that are constantly shifting? Or how do we intervene today in ways that remain relevant 5 or 10 years from now? Or how do we anticipate structural changes that may reshape the systems itself? This led us to an important realization that understanding how system works today is only part of the challenge. Systems are constantly evolving, so if we want to shape outcomes, we also need to think about how those systems might change over time. This is especially true in complex adaptive systems where the future is not simply an extension of the present. Systems evolve as people respond to incentives, as policies shift, as new technologies emerge, and as social and economic conditions also keep on changing. It also means that organizations rarely operate in isolated systems. They are usually part of systems that sit within larger systems, what we sometimes call meta systems. And for example, a civil society organization working on health policy is not only operating within health system, its work is also influenced by political dynamics, by economic conditions, funding, environment, and global development agendas. And because of this, shaping the future requires more than understanding how systems behave today. It also requires exploring how those systems may evolve. And this is where foresight becomes essential. Over time, we began then integrating these two approaches in our work, and that integration eventually became the foundation of the methodology we now call Systems Informed Foresight. We began by looking more closely at two fields that are often used separately, but that can actually complement each other very well. The first is systems thinking. As I said, it helps us understand how a system functions today, how different actors interact, and how certain patterns emerge. And the second one is the foresight. Foresight focuses on how the forces shaping a system may evolve over time. It helps us identify early signals of change, examine structural shift, and explore plausible future scenarios. So what we began to realize through our work is that these two perspectives naturally belong together. Systems thinking helps us understand the current dynamics of a system, while foresight helps us explore those dynamics and how they might change in the future. And when you combine the two, you can test your strategies against different possible features before committing to a particular course of action. This integration is what we call systems informed foresight. It literally brings together systems understanding and future exploration, helping organizations design strategies that are grounded in present realities while remaining responsive to emerging changes. Now, let me talk about the core idea behind SIF. At its core, SIF is built on a simple idea. If organizations want to act effectively in complex environments, they need two things: a clear understanding of the system they operate in and an appreciation of how that system may evolve in the future. SIF brings these two perspectives together in a single approach to decision-making. It starts by framing the problem and understanding the structure and dynamics of the system. From there, it explores how that system might evolve under different conditions. In practice, what that means is identifying leverage points within a system and using them to explore how different drivers of change might reshape the system over time, and how interventions may perform across alternative futures. So in a sense, SIF connects systems insight, future exploration, and practical action. And to operationalize this idea, the methodology is structured around a continuous learning cycle consisting of 3 stages: awareness, application, and adaptation, as mentioned earlier on. The first phase is awareness. This phase focuses on understanding how a problem or a strategic question is situated within a wider system. Here, what we do is we begin by framing the problem or question and situating it within the system of which it is part of, while also defining the boundaries of that system. Then comes the systems diagnosis, where we examine actors within the system, how they relate to one another, looking at power dynamics, what incentives shape behavior, and how institutional arrangement or narratives influence outcomes. Through this process, we begin to map the systems and identify leverage points where change may be possible. For example, if we look at the challenge of low childhood vaccination rates in the health system, in the awareness phase, the issue is not framed simply as a technical problem or insufficient vaccines. Instead, the problem is situated within the broader health systems. This may include examining the roles of national health authorities, roles of local clinics, community health workers, international donors, and community leaders. The system diagnosis then look at how those actors interact one another. For instance, supply chain delay affecting vaccine availability, or funding mechanism influencing how resources are distributed, and community beliefs or misinformation influencing how caregivers bring children for vaccinations. We may also have power dynamics between policymakers and local health providers, affecting health services delivery, which in turn then affects health outcomes. So when you begin to map this relationship, it helps you see where meaningful influence exists within the system. Once this understanding is developed, then we move to the second phase, application. This phase translates systems insight into practical action. So if the first phase focuses on diagnosing and mapping the system and identifying leverage points, the second phase focuses on using those leverage points to design intervention strategies. At this stage, foresight becomes particularly important because this is where we explore how the forces shaping the system may evolve and how potential interventions may perform under different future scenarios. And this may involve designing interventions. It also may involve developing pilot initiatives or experimenting with new approaches. The goal here is to ensure that actions are grounded both in systems understanding and in plausible future development. If we have to use the vaccination example that I gave earlier on, Imagine that our system analysis shows that community trust and reliable vaccine supply are 2 key leverage points for improving vaccination uptake. In this phase, the application, we will start testing practical ways of acting on those leverage points. For example, this may involve strengthening community health worker network, or even building partnership with local leaders to help address misinformation and build trust around vaccine. At the same time, we may also explore how future factors such as population growth or changing funding environment, like recently, could influence how this intervention performs over time. And what possible future scenario we can also consider to ensure that they remain effective and sustainable. The third phase of the SIF cycle is adaptation. Why adaptation? Because complex systems are constantly evolving, as I said. As organizations act within a system, the system also responds. So sometimes those responses are expected, but sometimes they create unintended consequences. The adaptation phase focuses on learning from those dynamics now. At this stage, we may pay attention to signals emerging in the system, reflecting on what is happening and how, or maybe adjust our strategies as conditions also evolve. So let's return to the health system example. In the awareness phase, the system is mapped and key leverage points are identified. In the application phase, an intervention is introduced, for example, an effort to improve collaboration between different actors in the health system. As the intervention unfolds now, practitioners observe how the systems respond. Some changes happen as expected, while other changes reveal new barriers or behavior that were not anticipated as we were designing the intervention. And this is where adaptation becomes particularly important. At this stage, collaboration between practitioners and researchers becomes very valuable, because practitioners, they bring practical insight from working with the system, while researchers can analyze these dynamics more systematically and help explain why certain patterns are emerging. At the same time, these observations can also be treated as signals of possible future change. So when you interpret these signals, then you can update your scenario or multiple scenarios that you come up with and rethink how strategies might need to evolve. In this way, adaptation phase turns implementation into a continuous learning process, connecting practice, research, and future thinking. Together now, awareness, application, and adaptation form an ongoing learning cycle that help organizations move from understanding to action, while also staying responsive to how the system continues to change. Now, let me talk about where this approach can be applied. Although the methodological logic remains the same, SIF can be applied across many different domains where complex systems shape outcomes. I mentioned the social programs. I gave a lot of examples in health systems. SIF can also be applied in market systems to understand how firms, regulators, infrastructure, and financial actors interact within industry systems. It can also be applied in value chains to examine how value flows through production, logistics, and distribution networks. It can also be applied in industry ecosystems to analyze how industries evolve through interactions among firms, institutions, technology, and policy. SIF can also be applied in policy environment to explore how governance structures and regulatory dynamics influence systems outcome, and also in innovation ecosystems to understand how entrepreneurs, research institutions, investors, and policy environment interact to enable innovation. So what I'm trying to say is across these domains, SIF support research, facilitation, strategy, processes, and systems level learning. Why this is relevant for research and practice collaboration. Why conversations like this one with CIREM are so important. Earlier, when I spoke about the adaptation phase, I mentioned how important it expertise to strengthen the connection between research and practice. In many fields, we still see a gap between these two worlds. Academic research often generates valuable insight about how systems function. Practitioners, on the other hand, gain deeper experience from working with those systems and trying to implement real interventions. But these perspectives do not always connect effectively. Research can remain quite theoretical, while practice often struggles to turn experience into structured learning that others can build on. So approaches like Systems Informed Foresight can help bridge this gap. They create structured processes where research insight, practitioner experience, and collective reflection can come together. In practice, this means creating spaces where academics, policymakers, and practitioners can look at systems dynamic together, explore features, and design responses informed by both analysis and experience. This kind of collaboration is especially important in areas like health systems or climate policies, where challenges are complex and also involve many actors and institutions. So in a way, navigating that complexity requires both analytical insight and practical implementation. And it's often when these two perspectives come together that meaningful systems change becomes possible. This concludes my presentation for today, and I thank you. I'm not sure if Aloysius is here to take us to the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Arsene. I think it's been a very, very well laid out presentation, Arsene, and we are very grateful to share this with us. I believe the thumbs up I see flowing on my screen reflect that appreciation across the board. So colleagues, if you have any reflections, comments, maybe even questions, this is an opportunity for you to raise your hand, and we can allow you to vocalize your comment or question. Otherwise, Arsene, what we could start off with in the meantime is how long have you been working in this space, and how has your learning shifted? Because for many of us, this comes off as a quite intimidating piece of work. We are happy to learn from you how you have been able to learn, whether you have attended classes or whether it's been part of, as you have indicated, practice and learning on as we navigate the journey. We are happy to appreciate that.
Thank you so much. I've been in the social sector for over 25 years, working across different fields and domain areas of work, including public health, including youth development, and including the creative sector as well. So the whole idea started by reflecting on how can we do things differently on the ground so we can start seeing meaningful change. We took courses on systems thinking and foresight. So now, as we've been working with this approach, it's allowing us not to only understand the system, but explore how they might change.
Great. There is a comment and a question from Joseph. Joseph, would you want to mention your comment, or I can read it for you? John, kindly assist where possible. But John has a question for us. He observes that many of our systems are designed to make people respond and create, so anticipate and be proactive. So this creates gaps where we are always reacting to problems instead of planning for them. And he thinks that foresight becomes critical in that space by giving us a structured way to approach the future, imagine different possible futures, and then redesign systems that empower us to navigate those futures. So his question is, how can system informed foresight help us redesign these systems so people become active creators of the future and not just responders to it? You could have mentioned a few of the things, but maybe there are some particular aspects. Joseph, are you able to speak up?
Well, I got the question. I got the question.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Joseph. That's actually a very good question. It's kind of touching on what also motivated us to do things differently. So to answer your question, Systems Informed Foresight is really bringing the two things that I mentioned earlier on. So you have, on one hand, understanding the system, because systems are evolving as you are working with it. The interaction of actors, the power dynamics, they determine the behavior of a particular system, and that makes the system to keep on evolving. So the SIF helps redesign systems by shifting how we react to change toward actively shaping it, and it does this by helping actors understand the dynamics of the system they are part of, identify where influence exists, and use foresight now, the integration, to explore how those systems may evolve so they can intervene deliberately rather than responding passively the way we've been doing the traditional way.
Thanks, Arsene. Within this group, we have several young colleagues who are doing their master's training. What would be the kind of guidance you give them? Some of them are thinking of maybe research topics or even dissertation topics to take. How can this approach be of value? We also have some who are doing PhD studies. They may want to apply these approaches. How can they be assisted?
Yeah, that's the parts. That's, I think, what I tried to cover in the last slide of my presentation, where I was talking about bridging the bridge that SIF does when it comes to research and practice. So what we've been doing, and where I feel can be helpful for students, especially master students, is learning through iterative learning cycles. So we have our community that is called the Systems Features Network of Practice, where we organize labs looking at thematic topics. We are thinking of reimagining governance in the space of non-profit sector. So if you are doing your research in that particular space where you want to support non-profit or NGOs to better respond to the intervention in a fast and rapid evolving world, we are creating those learning spaces where we bring expert or practitioners to come together to discuss the challenges, and then we applied the SIF. So as I said, the research and practice. So through those labs, we do it through applied studios. So what the methodology helps in that case is to connect the two so that insight informs actions and action continuously refine understanding. If you look at the way things are now happening, so more and more, even investors or funders, we're seeing it more in the market space, but also in the social systems. Everybody is more interested in adaptive learnings or adaptive practices. So SIF is really there to bring that component. The AAA cycle is not a linear cycle. It's feed to the other, so that learning can become continuous and people can keep on adapting as they implement. At some point, I would probably discuss with you further to tell you how they can access our network of practice to get more insight about these things that I'm talking about.
That will be useful as we try to reach the conclusion. But there are some questions in the chat, Arsene. Edward is appreciating your presentation. He has been, I think, working to apply system thinking through some approach called Inspire, but is keen to understand some key lessons that we have drawn from conducting co-design workshops. How do they play out from your experience?
Yeah, so I think that question would be good if I answer it. If I answer the question directly by giving a concrete example when we did that in practice. I'll give the latest example. that we did last year around November. So it was our work on the scenario skills labs. So we applied SIF across the 3 labs. This was like human rights lab, feminist organizing, youth and climate futures. The way we did it is we started with awareness phase using causal layered analysis to unpack not just the visible challenges like repression, backlash, and exclusion, but the deeper systemic drivers, the worldviews and narratives sustaining them. This helped participants to clearly situate their challenges within the wider system and identify leverage points. We then move into application phase where we used horizon scanning and scenario building to explore possible, probable and preferred features. And from then, participants backcasted into practical pathways, defining concrete actions such as policy engagement, coalition building, protection systems, and youth-led climate initiatives. And finally, the adaptation phase focused on how these strategies evolved in practice, the tracking signals, learning from how the systems respond, and adjusting approaches over time. The overall result was a shift from reactive responses to more strategic, future-oriented, and systems-informed action across the 3 ecosystems. Because it was 2 labs, so we ran it in such a way that each group had to live with a document on how they're going to implement it at the organizational level. So that's a concrete example that I can give when it comes to how we've applied this in the past. But also, I think it's important to mention that, you see, as we do these things, we take our time also to learn and reflect, especially when it comes to organization implementing it. I mean, what is the hard part that I've seen in implementing SIF? It's in the process. And I see Mutile also ask a question that is similar to that, I think, by saying this is going to answer her question. The hardest part is often moving from awareness to application. Because what we learn is that many organizations are able to understand system dynamics, but they struggle when it comes to translating that insight into different decisions and ways of acting in practice. So that has been one of the challenges. And what we've been helping them with is to really take your time, make sure that you understand those drivers of change or the leverage point that you find, so that when you get to the application phase, you start mapping the features, knowing that you are dealing with a system that is adaptive, and that allows you to continuously learning and feed into the adaptation phase, so that as you do your intervention, whether it's 3 years or 4 years, you keep on coming to that cycle to adapt so that change can be efficient.
Great.
There is another.
So there's a question about working with government systems that tend to be bureaucratic, rigid. How are they embracing systems informed foresight from your experience? That is
Yes. Yes, with government, I think it's a challenge, not only with SIF, but even when we started working with systems thinking itself as an approach that was like 5 to 6 years back. In South Africa, where I'm based, yes, systems thinking itself as an approach has been recognized, but embedding it into government processes is still a long way. And I know that's the same problem with SIF. It's still a long way because of processes, because it takes time. It's not something that, in fact, government has been seeing these approaches as sense-making tools rather than a tool that can allow them to put it in practice. But what we are also learning in that is when you do more practice activities, you have now the evidence to go and advocate for something particular. So the practice is what is feeding, and that's why we are also pushing more to be doing collaboration with academic institutions, so that there is validation when it comes to learnings, and that can be now used to advocate to governments to be able to adopt these methodologies, because the world is evolving and there is need to adapt to how we do change on the ground.
Thank you for that, and being open. These approaches don't really come off quickly and easily. So there's a process of learning. Of course, as in the same words that you used, Arsene, the systems are also trying to adapt to the new ways of thinking. Sometimes the deeply seated forces and structures cannot easily allow these newer ways of working. Okay, I think we have answered Mutile's question as well in terms of the challenges that you have faced. There was a question from Elizabeth. Okay, maybe Esther comes closer to me here. How is this methodology of learning studios different from learning labs? Could they be the same or just changing name?
Most of these methodologies, I have to say, they complement one another. The applicability of it is the SIF one. I think I presented it nicely. But where it can be different is the nature of the lab or the hub. So in our case, we do applied studios. Applied studios are small experiments that vary. They take sometimes they take 3 to 6 months, because you work on a program. So you design a journey where you know that we start from a phase A, and this is the journey we're going to take, and there are clear outcomes. But they can also be depends on various forms. So we also have learning events. If you join our community, we have learning structures where we do it through small workshops, 3 to 5 days, depending on how you design the intervention. And maybe to say that when it comes to how we applied this approach, it really depends. It depends on, the nature of work that we are doing. We have that flexibility to adapt. So if you are working on, if it's about a workshop, or if it's about a process or a process that you want to design, if it's about strategy, it all depends. So we have that flexibility. But when it comes to tools, the tools we mix a kind of series of tools. We have systems thinking tools that we applied in the process. We also do apply foresight tools and systems inquiries tools.
Very helpful. I think, Arsene, we shall organize the session where we can have more in-depth elaboration of these tools, since now we have had an introductory session. There was a comment from Elizabeth about forgetting whether you have done a readiness assessment for SIF to be implemented. But we have someone who is really eager to share something. Joseph Odoi, we don't have much time, but I'm happy to hear your comment. And then we see how to wrap this up in the next 3 or so minutes.
Mine was in the focus of how can this be applied practically, because it's looking at how you can translate systems thinking into action. And the gentleman highlighted some of the things, but I wanted to answer it in a structured way. So the first step is you have to first understand the system, and that comes with mapping. Who are the actors? What's the relationship? And what's the power dynamics? Then from there, you get to know which tools to use. And this would mean working with, let's say, if you're in the community, you work with communities to understand why certain challenges persist, not just what they are. Then from there, you're able to explore these futures. And this helps you to understand what's happening and what could happen after that. So if say, people are saying that, let's say there are issues around WASH, then what would be the future of WASH? And then from there, you co-design interventions, which brings together different stakeholders, whether it's government or what, and then they generate the solutions, then they test it. So this ensures that everyone's voice is included and everyone's knowledge is involved. And in that aspect, systems are well represented, and it's adaptive, but also sustainable, because everyone involved. Thank you.
Thank
That
you
was
so
a very
much,
good
Joseph.
summary, Joseph. We
Thank you
really
so much.
appreciate and yeah.
Thank
Arsene, I think we need to bring this to a close, but I
Yes,
give you a moment to
yes.
lead
I
colleagues
just
where they can learn more, and
yeah.
maybe we can also signal opportunities in the future to unpack these tools and approaches across the different phases of the SIF.
Yes, cool. Thank you so much, Joseph. What you said is actually that's what it is. That's level of detail was very useful when it comes to doing it at the community or with people. I did also give some examples on how we did it in various workshops. There is a question here that I saw, I don't know, about readiness. I think it's important to mention that Elizabeth, in our experience, the transition is not only about adopting new method, but about how ready an organization is to work differently. We typically start with a light touch readiness scan at the beginning of the SIF process. Based on this now, we then adapt the depth and pace of the SIF process. The SIF is designed to meet organizations where they are while gradually building their capacity to think and act in more adaptive and system-aware ways. So this is what we do. I did put the link of the website. If you go to our website, you'll be able to read more about the work that we do. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me.
Very wonderful, our esteemed audience. We are very grateful for you sparing this afternoon and maybe morning, depending on where you are, to join us. The CIREM Hub is very grateful for RIAHSAH and the colleagues led by Arsene for sharing with us. I believe there will be more opportunities to deepen our practical understanding of the approaches. But I think there is some awareness that has been aroused within our minds, and maybe it's a trigger to see how we can embrace systems informed foresight. We shall continue to provide more opportunities to learn together. Your names are captured in our mailing lists, colleagues. So we'll continue to look out as we embrace, as we explore more ways of navigating complexity. Other than that, I want to acknowledge the colleagues at the School of Public Health. Many of the people you see here are saying colleagues we work with. I acknowledge Faith. Faith Hungwe is a colleague from Zimbabwe. We have Julius Corredo. I don't know where you are based, but we're happy to have you. Linda, part of RIAHSAH. And other colleagues who are joining us, Sam Mungai, I believe you are somewhere in Kenya or somewhere. So we are very grateful for joining us, and we believe this will be Denise and others, and the colleagues from Uganda, and also John, who has been our IT support. Other than that, I want to bring this to a close and wish everybody a pleasant week or weekend. It may come earlier, for some colleagues have been fasting. So all the best from CIREM Hub.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, thanks.